Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at restoration druids in 5-man content. So this video is going to cover talents, Azerite gear, stat priority, and the gameplay that's associated with resto druids in 5-man dungeons. Now first of all, just a small summary of resto druids. Resto druids are doing very well in 5-man dungeons. There's a lot of emphasis on resto druid healing. There's a lot of emphasis on healing and DPS, and there is different talent builds that kind of correlate with that priority, depending on whether you want to optimize your DPS or whether you feel you want to babysit your group more. So there is a lot of different talent builds or talent choices that are available for Resto Druid, to an extent that Resto Druid probably has the most choice out of any of the healers when it comes to talents in 5-mans. So first of all, I'll talk about the safe build and the gameplay that's associated with that. Then I'll talk about the more DPS oriented build or the global cooldown oriented build and the gameplay associated with that as well, and you can pick whichever you feel. I mean, this build is more for pugs. This build is more for resto druids who are kind of new, who are relatively scared coming into the 5-man dungeons, and they're thinking like, I'm not sure if I will be able to do DPS because I'm not sure how much damage is going to be. I'm not sure how good these pugs are. Maybe the rogue that I invited is going to stand in everything that's bad and I'm going to need to babysit them, and this is the build for that kind of. So first of all, you have Abundance. Against Abundance has been changed from Legion in BfA when coming into BfA. Abundance now, for each rejuvenation you have active, it reduces regrowth's cost in terms of mana, which is not big in 5-man dungeons because you'll be drinking between each and every pull, or at least you'll be drinking when you really need that mana. But again, reduction in mana is not bad, because the less mana that you spend between these chain pulls or between the bosses, the less time you'll be drinking, the more time you'll be able to heal or DPS. So it's not nothing, and on top of the fact, it's also going to increase your critical effect chance based on how many rejuves. And this talent directly synergizes with Germination because you'll be able to put out more rejuvenations. Again, double rejuvenations with Germination. You have to remember that. In tier 30, it's between Tiger Stash and Wild Charge, depending on which one you are more comfortable with. Tiger Stash is extremely easy to use. Again, it replaces Dash, so you don't actually get an additional movement ability. Again, RIP Displacer Beast is no longer here. But Tiger Stash is really easy to use. Wild Charge requires a little more optimization. You can set up macros and things like that, but again, Wild Charge, Tiger Stash, good choices depending on what you need. In tier 45, if you're new to Resto Druid and you're not sure about the dungeon and you're not sure what's gonna happen, Guardian Affinity, passive damage reduction towards you, gives you frenzy regen, so you can go into your bear form and activate frenzy regen if you really need to. Again, this whole thing has been changed from Legion because it takes more global cooldowns to actually do that. Bear form has been nerfed and frenzy regen has also been nerfed, but the fact is that in BfA there's not that many one-shot mechanics, and bear form, and especially with frenzy regen, is probably going to be more than enough for most of the scenarios that you're going to encounter. Again, there's less one-shot mechanics that are happening in BfA, and there's more emphasis on actually optimizing your pulls, optimizing your strategy, and optimizing your DPS. Now, if you feel you can actually perform DPS, or if you feel that you want to do more than just Moonfire and Sunfire and Solar Rat, which is your kind of bread and butter DPS if you don't go cat weaving, if you feel you can do a bit more than that, feel free to go into Feral Affinity, because Feral Affinity is extremely strong in terms of optimizing your damage, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Now in tier 60, probably the most popular choice is Typhoon because it fits for so many different affixes. Like, I mean, for Sanguine it works really well. Again, there are certain bosses where Mass Entanglement can be really strong. If you look at King's Rest, first boss, where you can Mass Entangle the adds and just completely forget about them. There are certain gimmicky fights where Mass Entanglement can be really strong. Again, depending on affixes. In tier 75, it's going to be Tree, and I picked Tree because it's one of the safe builds. And why do I say it's a safe build? It's mainly because you'll have an additional cooldown on top of your Tranquility. Now, Tranquility is an amazingly strong cooldown in 5-mans because it scales on group size. There's not many healing cooldowns in BfA or even in Legion that scale on group size, and Tranquility is one of those. And Tranquility has arguably become stronger in BfA, and it's really a good cooldown to have in 5-man dungeons, especially for weeks like Bursting, for weeks like Grievous as well. And having Tranquility and then Tree of Life means you have more leeway in terms of, oh, we pulled extra trash back, oh, the tank is taking way too much damage, no one's using the personal cooldown, everyone's dipping super low, I have my Tree of Life. You use that, you're gonna get empowered rejuvenations, instant regrowths, stronger wild growths, well, it's going to affect 2 additional targets, but it's going to increase your spells and it's going to increase the power of your healing. And you then can decide to basically, okay, I use my Tree of Life on this trash pack pull, I'm gonna save Tranquility for the next one, or if there's so much damage happening, maybe you're gonna use everything. It really depends. But having a fallback is really strong for pug groups or groups that you're not sure about. In tier 90, I think a lot of people will go with Stonebark right now because tank will take majority of your damage in 5-man dungeons, and having Ironbark on a shorter cooldown, first of all, Ironbark coming from Legion to BfA was reduced to 1 minute, which is extremely nice, considering having a damage reduction cooldown on such a short cooldown, and then having Stonebark reducing that, and on top of the fact it also increases the healing of your heal over time effect by 20% when the person has Ironbark on them, makes it a decent cooldown for your tank. Again, it doesn't always have to be a tank, it can be someone who's taking a really nasty debuff and things like that. But tanks will take a lot of damage, and having something like that for nearly every single trash pack pull, it works really well. Again, I'm not saying inner peace is not viable, because if you are going with like Grievous and Bursting Weeks, Tranquility on 2-minute cooldown can be really strong for those terrible moments when Bursting dealing tons of damage or you fall behind on Grievous. So keep that in mind. As well, to some extent, Spring Blossoms can be really viable as well. But this is the safe build. I'll talk about the other builds later on. And in tier 100, we'll go with Germination. Germination here is really popular because of the mastery stacks that you gain from it. Again, mastery, if you're very unfamiliar with Restoration Druid, the more healing overtime effects you have on your target, the more mastery stacks you get and the more healing you do on that target. So having 2 rejuvenations increases your healing. On myself, rejuvenation's duration has been reduced. So a lot of the times you'll be spending just pre-hotting people, and what I mean by pre-hotting is that applying hots to targets before damage comes out. And it's kind of important to do that even in 5-man dungeons, because if you're applying your rejuvenation to someone who's already 50%, let's say the whole group is already 50% and you don't have any hots out there, it's going to be hard for you to catch up unless you have like Tree of Life or Tranquility. So preemptively applying your rejuvenations, knowing when the damage comes out, it's a safe choice to keep 2 rejuvenations on the tank at all times. But besides that, applying this to other party members, it all depends on how well you know the dungeon, it all depends how you know the boss, how well you know the damage patterns and things like that. So keep in mind that with this Germination build, you'll probably spend a lot of your time applying this and not spending a lot of time in DPS. And it all depends on how well you know the boss, how well you're comfortable with the dungeon group. So the kind of playstyle that's associated with this is, like I mentioned, keeping your rejuvenations on the tank, keeping, like if someone's dipping low, you'll be casting your regrowths to make sure they get full. Regrowth also leaves a hot on them that stacks with mastery. Again, mastery is the name of the game here. It'll be on trash pack pulls where you feel you need that extra healing, you'll be using a fluorescence. Again, there's spells that require good uptime, and that is a fluorescence and as life bloom. Having a close to 100% uptime is really good. I mean, to be completely honest, in 5-man situations, you might not always need a fluorescence, especially if you're not running something like Spring Blossoms. Some of the trash pack pulls might die before even a fluorescence does anything, so it's all based on the kind of damage. Like heavy damage is incoming, you most likely will need any extra healing, so a fluorescence comes in handy, but it's not always needed. You use your own judgment when you really need that. Like, it's an extra global cooldown, so keep that in mind. On top of that, like I mentioned, life bloom, rejuvenation, regrowth when you really need it, when you need that single target healing, Swiftment when you need to bring someone up from really low. Swiftment heals for a lot. It does have a quite long cooldown, but it heals for a lot, so you can save someone's life. On top of the fact that Wild Growth, again, Wild Growth is a great AoE healing ability that applies hots on targets. Again, works with mastery, so you'll be using Wild Growth when the group is taking a lot of damage. If you don't pick Feral Affinity, just try applying Moonfire and Sunfire on targets. Just having Moonfire and Sunfire on trash packs is going to increase your DPS by a lot and will help you to complete the key in time. It only takes a couple of global cooldowns, especially Sunfire. If the trash pack is very close together, just one Sunfire will apply it to everybody. And that's just it's one global cooldown, it's a lot of extra damage, and you can go back to applying your rejuvenations if you feel very unsure about the damage that's incoming, if you want to feel extra safe. So it's not really like it's only one global cooldown. So let's look at the more DPS oriented build, and this is one of the builds that's kind of, it's called now the global cooldown build to some extent, because you're going to be minimizing The global cooldown spent on healing and maximizing your uptime or time in DPS, and that means kitty form, because cat weaving is really strong in BfA, and there are multiple reasons. There's been multiple quality of life changes that made cat weaving pretty strong, and I'll talk about it later on. So the talent build for this, again, you're going to be trying to maximizing your time in kitty form. So you'll be picking things like Scenario Ward, which you can place on your tank, or targets that have really strong debuffs on them, they're about to die. Scenario Ward works, you most likely will be using it on cooldown on your tank, again, stacks with mastery. Tier 30, Tiger Slash, Wild Charge, doesn't really matter. Tier 45, absolutely Feral Affinity, this works really well in terms of damage optimization. Tier 60, again, Typhoon, Mass Entanglement, or any of these depending on situation. Tier 75 is going to be your Cultivation, because when your Rejuvenation heals a target below 60% health, it applies Cultivation. So what this means is that if you have a Rejuvenation on someone, and let's say this kind of build, I forgot to mention, is the build that you'll be using with your guildmates, the people that you trust. Maybe on a Discord group where you can optimize which trash box to pull, when to use cooldowns, when it's a tank using cooldowns. You need to be very comfortable with the group that you're playing with in order to use a build like this, because with this build you place a Rejuvenation on your rogue, whatever, they dip below 60%, your cultivation procs, your cultivation applies a hot stacks with mastery, Rejuvenation stacks with mastery. All of a sudden you're in your kitty DPS form and you're wondering, do I go out and heal them, or do I stay in my DPS form? And with this build, one of the answers at least should be, I'll stay in my DPS form and I'll let my HOTS heal up that player, because I feel confident in that player. I feel confident that player is not going to take any avoidable damage, and I know the damage patterns of this fight. There's not going to be any damage incoming very soon, so I'm going to let my HOTS do the work. The difference between the previous build is that you'll probably go out and regrowth them, or you'll try and get them to 100% HP because you're not sure what they're going to be doing. That's the other build. This is the DPS global cooldown build, where you will trust your members to and let your HOTS heal them up. And Cultivation can do that. It's very, very passive. Now in tier 90, a lot of these, to be completely honest, there's a lot of choice here. All of these are actually viable depending on affixes. Spring Blossoms again is another thing that's very passive. You place your Fluorescence, you tell your party on your Discord, hey, I have a Fluorescence, I have Spring Blossoms, it's gonna apply a hot on you, it's gonna work with Mastery, please go and stand here so I can go and keep DPSing. So this is something that requires communication, and Spring Blossoms again works even better in melee heavy parties, but it also works well because you can just place a Fluorescence, let your tank stand in there, and you can stand in here as well in case you're taking damage. So again, Spring Blossom is one of those talents that requires some kind of a coordination between the groups, and it works well in this talent build. You can go with Stonebark, you can go with Inner Peace on things like Bursting and Grievous if you need to catch up. A lot of the talents here are viable depending on what you need. Now in tier 100 you probably will go Photosynthesis, and Photosynthesis has been buffed quite a lot to an extent that it makes it quite viable for this build. And one of the reasons is because while your Life Bloom is an ally, your periodic heals on them have a 5% chance to cause it to bloom. And this provides a lot of single target healing on your tank or priority target. You just place your Life Bloom. First of all, if you have a bad uptime of Life Bloom and it don't maintain as close to 100% as possible, don't pick this talent, because this talent requires awareness of when your Life Bloom falls off. So if you go into combat, you need to have some kind of record that tells you, oh, my Life Bloom is gone, I need to make sure I need to place it on a tank or whatever. You need to have a record for this to really work. You need to have a good uptime, but if you do, you can basically place Life Bloom and as many HOTS as you can on your tank, and then just go into DPS. And these HOTS and Life Bloom and everything, they're gonna provide a lot of single target constant healing. Single target constant healing. There are people who have gone with Flourish, but again, it's a 1.5 minute cooldowns. You can make it work, but a lot of people also opt in with this specific build to go with Photosynthesis because it provides constant single target healing on your tank, and there is always constant damage happening to your tank, so it makes sense to have this, especially when you're trying to maximize your DPS. Plus with Photosynthesis you have an option of placing Life Bloom on yourself during heavy AoE damage and having your periodic heals heal 20% faster, which basically gives you an option of when or how to use your Life Bloom, whether you want it on for constant single target healing on your tank, which you probably will be using for majority of the time, but you also have that backup option when you feel like there's so much damage happening that you might swap and use Life Bloom on yourself, on top of the fact that you'll be probably wild growing, rejuvenating, and all of that things. in order to increase your healing during those heavy AoE moments. One of the things that makes your kitty so strong in terms of DPS, there's quite a few things that change. So first of all, in Legion, when you apply your bleed, so when you apply your rip or rake or whatever on the targets, and if you go back into your normal caster form and you go and heal people and things like that, in Legion, this was heavily punished because your bleeds would do a fraction of the damage that they're supposed to deal in your kitty form. So in Legion, it's either you stay in kitty form or you go out and completely sacrifice your DPS. In BfA, that's been completely changed. You're no longer punished. You can go in, you can apply your bleeds. You can apply your bleeds on as many targets as you want. And if someone's about to die or they need healing, you can go out and heal them. You can apply your rejuvenations or whatever. And your bleeds are going to be ticking for the same damage they did in kitty form. So now you're dealing damage and you're healing at the same time at no cost to your DPS, which is absolutely great. On top of the fact that Innovate, this was perceived as a bug at the very start, but it's never been fixed, and I don't think this is a bug, but if you use Innovate and if you go into your kitty form, you can spam your abilities at no cost whatsoever. So my energy is not going down at all. So I can just use anything, swipe on a big trash bag pull or whatever, and then I can, like, Innovate has become an offensive DPS cooldown, and there are very few healers who actually have offensive DPS cooldowns out there. And this is one of the reasons that make cat weaving or your kitty form feral affinity really strong option in 5-man dungeons when you need to optimize that DPS, especially when you pair it up with certain trinkets and things like that. You can see some really good numbers. Again, the difference between this DPS build or the global cooldown build, you don't want to spend that much time healing. You want to apply your rejuvenations. You want to make sure when they dip low, your cultivation is going to be doing work. You want to make sure your party members step into your fluorescence, depending if you're going to pick it. Step into your fluorescence, get more of mastery stacks. You want to make sure your tank has, all the hots possible on them, and you're going to go to town on your kitty form. On top of the fact that you, as well, also have to maintain your Sunfire and Moonfire, because these are just free DPS. This is free DPS on top of your kitty DPS. So keep that in mind. So overall, I've never had as much fun when playing Resto Druid, when optimizing my kitty DPS, when optimizing my healing, because you always have something to do with this build. There's always something to optimize. Like, it's really extremely fun. You will not regret trying to get into DPS more as a healer. Believe me, you'll have a lot of fun. In terms of stat priority, it's the same as it was in Legion. Haste Mastery, Mastery Haste, they're both really good stats. You don't really want to stack one to an extreme amount. You kind of want to have a balance between those, because they're both very good in terms of the pure healing that you're going to be doing. Keep in mind that if you are looking to optimize your DPS, Mastery provides 0 in terms of DPS, but we're not going to go too much into that right now. But Mastery Haste increases, like, you can heal faster, so you can prevent deaths. Mastery stacks is, like I mentioned throughout the whole video, stacking as many Mastery hots or Mastery stacks on targets can really help with healing, so it makes sense that those are the best. In terms of the Azerite traits that are really strong, again, any Azerite traits that give you Mastery procs or Mastery are perceived as very strong. So it's no surprise that things like Inside the Pact, things like Trade Winds, which give you a Mastery proc, are deemed as one of the best Azerite traits you can use in 5-man dungeons, on top of the fact that at least one trait in Growth Tending, which is the Swiftman trait, when you Swiftman, it's going to leave a hot on a target. Usually it's going to be a tank, or again, anyone who takes a heavy debuff, but usually it's going to be a tank who's going to get this hot on them, which is, again, stacks with Mastery, provides that free healing. If you look at secondary rings, you can't go wrong with Blessed Portents. Blessed Portents, for the people who played Legion, they know this is the High Father's Trinket effect, which again makes it strong in raids and 5-man dungeons. On top of that, you have things like Azerite Veins, Blood Siphon, and Synergetic Growth. Synergetic Growth is the more fun one, I guess. Now, this is really strong because every time you're going to be using Wild Growth, that at least the party is taking some sort of AoE damage, and having Mastery, which is one of your best secondary stats, proc and give you more of it during the situation when you need more healing, it works really great. It works really great as well with that. If you look at the inner rings, Resounding Protection, again, Pridus if you played in Legion, and things like Ursoc Endurance, when you use Bark Skin, you get Absorb on it, can be really strong in 5-man dungeons if you properly use it. Absorbs are always strong. They're always strong. So this has been my overview of Resto Druid 5-man guide. I'll probably do a raiding guide maybe in the future. Let me know how you feel about this. Let me know if you like the video, if you enjoy the content. Subscribe and all of that, and like. It really helps out the channel. Believe me, it helps out the channel a lot. Thank you for watching this guide, and I'll see you in my next video.